now in session. This is the time and place set for trial. Are the people present?
Yes.
Okay, I'm having trouble hearing the people. Who's the attorney on behalf of the prosecution? I believe that it's Isabel.
Yes, it's Isabel. Sorry, I was muted.
Very good. That's okay. Are the people present then?
Yes, Your Honor.
The defense present.
Yes, Your Honor.
Are both sides prepared to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
We have an indictment before us on one first-degree murder charge. The first order of business is to enter a plea for the charge. Ms. Barrett,
Yes, Your Honor.
are you ready to enter a plea?
Yes, Your Honor, not guilty.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett. Counselor, are there any pretrial motions for either side?
No, Your Honor.
At this time, then, the court will begin with opening statements on behalf of the prosecution.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court and members of the jury, Your Honor, my name is Isabel Lucky, and this is my co-counsel, Cole Krieg. The issue in the case today is a matter of murder on the hands of the accused woman, Barbara Barrett. She, with malice and aforethought, murdered her husband. On the night of December 18, 1988, there was a call reporting a homicide. The officer sent to the scene was C.M. Cheney. The defendant's name is Barbara Barrett. The deceased's name is John Barrett. That night, John came home from work around 9 p.m. The only other person in the house at the time was their housekeeper, Lee Porter. During dinner, they began to argue on the matter of how frequently John came home from work. It was at this time that John stated that he wanted a divorce. Miss Barrett was upset and crying, and out of frustration, Mr. Barrett told her to leave the dining room. Before she left, she threatened, "You'll be sorry." She went into the living room and poured herself a glass of wine. Soon after, Mr. Barrett walked into the living room where Miss Barrett was waiting for him. She proceeded to inflict multiple gunshot wounds with malice aforethought. After Lee Porter witnessed this event, he rushed out of the house and called the police. When Officer C.M. Cheney arrived on the scene, he found Mr. Barrett murdered, lying on the dining room floor face down. Miss Barrett was found locked inside the basement bathroom. The evidence shows that Miss Barrett shot her gun 6 times and inflicted 5 gunshot wounds into her husband with a fatal shot into the back of the head. Also in Miss Barrett's statement, she confessed that at the time, Mr. Barrett had made no attempt to hurt her. So our first witness you will hear from is Lee Porter, the Barrett's housekeeper and chef, who will prove that Miss Barrett murdered her husband with malicious intent. After hearing 3 loud noises, Lee Porter witnessed Miss Barrett chasing a limping Mr. Barrett with blood-covered clothing. Earlier that day, after hearing 3 loud noises that he described as similar to a car backfiring, Lee witnessed Miss Barrett coming in from outside holding a gun. Our next witness is C.M. Cheney. He will clarify the crime scene. When Officer C.M. Cheney arrived at the scene of the crime, he found blood tracks from the living room into the dining room, where Mr. Barrett lay, face down with multiple gunshot wounds, and the murder weapon next to his head. Then he located Miss Barrett, who had locked herself into the basement bathroom and was screaming hysterically. She refused to open the door until Mr. C.M. Cheney explained that he would have to break the door down if she would not cooperate. Our final witness is Dr. Joe Arthing, the coroner. She will expand upon Miss Barrett's malicious intent through the detailed explanation of 5 gunshots inflicted on Mr. Barrett, 4 of which were executed while he fled away from her. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the back of the head. while Mr. Barrett lay face down on the floor. Exhibit 1 will be the diagram of the house. The diagram of the house shows blood splatters traveling from the living room into the dining room and a gun laying beside the deceased's head. Exhibit 2, diagram of the body. By showing the diagram of the body, we will clearly demonstrate the extent of Miss Barrett's malicious intent. At the time of the murder, Mr. Barrett was sober. Exhibit number 3 is the police report. The police report states her weapon of choice was a gun. She chose to use a weapon with deadly potential. As you can see, Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, after shooting her husband one time face to face, Barbara continued to pursue him as he fled, shooting him another 4 times, murdering him in cold blood, proving herself guilty of premeditation and malicious intent. For these reasons, we request a sentence of murder in the first degree. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Opening statement on behalf of the defense, please. Defense counsel, opening statement, please.
May it please your honor and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Allison Whitson, and these are my co-counsels, Katrina Howe, Logan Mercer, and Caden Aberdees. We are here today because excuse me, your honor.
Yes.
Can you repeat that, please?
I'm sorry, there must have been feedback in the background. I didn't say anything.
Your Honor, I think many people are not on mute, so there's a lot of
May
background
it please
noise.
your honor and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Allison Whitson.
I apologize.
Okay.
Allison, one
Sorry,
moment.
Your Honor.
If you are
Thank
not
you.
speaking, if you could please mute yourself. We are getting feedback in the background. Anyone who is not speaking, if you can mute yourself. I'm still hearing some feedback in the background. All right, I think almost everyone now is muted except for defense attorney, so that should help. Please proceed. Ms. Whitson, can you hear me? Who's the defense attorney that's making this opening?
Thank you, your honor. May it please your honor and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Allison and Caden. Yes, your honor.
Ms. Whitson, we're having problems with your volume.
Can you hear me?
I can see you now. I couldn't see you before. Go ahead and try again, Ms. Whitson. I think there may be a bad connection.
Okay, thank you. May it please your honor and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Allison Whitton, and these are my co-counsels, Katrina Howe, Logan Mercer, and Caden Aberdees. We are here today because Mrs. Barrett is a loving, her unfaithful husband. Because of the harsh words and constant abuse from her spouse, fear for her personal well-being, Mrs. Barrett was a frightened and battered woman who was traumatized from her aggressive husband. The defendant, Barbara Allen Barrett, had been harshly abused and battered for many years now and was caused much pain and heartache. On the night of the incident, Mr. Barrett came home late again and told Barbara he was leaving her that night, leaving Mrs. Barrett very distressed and upset. Later, Mrs. Barrett went into the living room by herself when just a few minutes later, Mr. Barrett came into the room threatening her with a belt. Our first witness will be the defendant, Barbara Allen Barrett, who will show you how her unloving husband was going to leave her and how all of the years of abuse led Mrs. Barrett to not be in her right mind on the night of the event. We are asking that the court find Mrs. Barrett not guilty of first-degree murder and that you find Mrs. Barrett to be the loving, loyal, forgiving wife that she had always been to her unfaithful husband. A woman whose sense of security was shattered when she was forced to live in a constant state of fear for her personal well-being. Our second witness will be Dan McGuire, our professional psychologist who's interviewed Miss Barrett 3 times over the course of a few weeks. Dan's diagnosis of Mrs. Barrett's condition is that she was in fact a battered woman who barely made it through living with her husband by going from one loving stage to the next. That is all, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time then, prosecution, are you ready to call your first witness? Prosecution? Who's my prosecution witness? You're gonna have to unmute yourself, Cole.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to call Lee Porter to the witness stand.
All right, Lee Porter, please rise. Lee Porter? I have it. There you go. Lee Porter, please rise. Raise your right hand. The bailiff will swear you in. Bailiff?
Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to the court and the jury of this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Please proceed with direct examination on behalf of the people.
Can you please state your name for the record?
Lee Porter.
How long have you worked for the Barretts?
About 6 months.
What are your hours?
2 in the afternoon until 10 at night.
How did Mr. Barrett treat you?
He was always nice to me, but sometimes he would get angry and throw something, but he would always apologize afterwards.
Did you ever see Mrs. Barrett being abused?
No.
Where were you the night of December 18th, 1988?
I was at the Barrett's house cooking dinner.
Did you notice anything unusual earlier that day?
Yes, I saw Mrs. Barrett walking around the house with a gun, and I heard the sound of gunshots coming from the backyard.
Can you tell us what happened that night?
Yes. Mr. Barrett arrived home late, maybe around 9 o'clock. He and Mrs. Barrett had an argument when they were eating dinner. Mrs. Barrett was hysterical and crying. Mr. Barrett told her to leave the room. As she was entering the living room, she said something like, "You'll be sorry." The next thing I know is I heard 3 loud gunshots coming from the living room. I saw Mr. Barrett bloody and limping in. He looked terrified. I saw Mrs. behind him with a gun in her hand. When I saw this, I fled out of the house and ran out of the house and called the police.
Since you are a witness, do you have any doubt on whether or not Mrs. Barrett was the one who shot Mr. Barrett?
I have no doubt.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Cross by the defense.
Is it true that you never saw bruises on Mrs. Barrett?
Can you please restate the question?
Is it true that you never saw bruises on Mrs. Barrett?
I never saw any bruises on her.
Is it true that Mr. Barrett had a bad temper sometimes, such as when dinner was not cooked the way he liked it?
Yes.
Is it true that you heard Mrs. Barrett scream after an argument in their bedroom?
Yes.
Is it true that you've been in trouble for stealing? Is it true that you have been in trouble with the law for stealing before?
Yes.
Is it true that you stated that when Mr. Barrett said, is it true that you stated Mr. Barrett wanted a divorce?
Can you please restate the question?
Is it true that Mr. Barrett said that he wanted a divorce?
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Is it true that you stated that Mr. Barrett wanted the divorce?
Yes.
Is it true that when you saw Mr. Barrett bloody, you ran through the kitchen and out the house?
Yes.
I would like to enter exhibit number 2.
What is exhibit number 2?
The house diagram.
Has that been shown to the people?
No objection, Your Honor.
People have no objection. Exhibit 2, the house diagram,
Can you show
will be
me?
admitted. You may proceed.
Can you show me on exhibit number 2 where the exit in the kitchen is?
On my diagram?
Yeah.
Wait, can you restate the question?
Can you show me on exhibit number 2 where the exit in the kitchen is?
It's not drawn on here.
No further questions, Your Honor. No further questions, Your Honor.
Does the prosecution have any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
And any objections to thanking and excusing this witness?
No, Your Honor.
With that, then, the prosecution may call the next witness. Mr. Porter, thank you for your time. You are excused, sir. The people's next witness?
Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to call Officer Cheney to the stand.
Officer Cheney, can you please rise and raise your right hand? Thank you. And will the bailiff please swear the witness in?
Do you affirm that the evidence you will give to the court and the jury of this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir. You may be seated. Prosecution counsel, you may proceed.
Can you state your name for the record?
My name is C.M. Cheney.
Can you state your credentials?
I received my bachelor's degree in criminal justice from South Bend College in Haddonfield, South Carolina. And I work for the Haddonfield Police Department. I've worked there for 7 years.
Your Honor, I would like to establish this witness as an expert in the field of law enforcement.
Any objections on behalf of the defense to establish this expert as an expert in law enforcement?
No, Your Honor.
The witness will be so established and may offer opinion testimony. It's submitted as an expert. Counsel, you may proceed with your direct examination.
How long have you been working for the Haddonfield Police Department?
About 7 years.
Have you ever been called to the scene of a homicide before this encounter?
Yes, I have been called to the scene of a homicide numerous times.
What have you been trained to do when you get to the scene of a homicide?
I've been trained to preserve physical evidence, measure physical proximities that are pertinent to the case, and to interview witnesses, including.
Were you the officer dispatched to the Barrett residence?
I was.
Your Honor, I would like to introduce Exhibit 1 into evidence and also refer to Exhibit 2.
Exhibit 1 is the police report in this matter of Officer Cheney. Any objections to that? First of all, has it been provided to defense counsel? Does defense counsel have Exhibit 1, the police report?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objections to Exhibit 1's admission?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 1 will be admitted by stipulation. Again, it's a police report by CM Cheney. Please proceed.
Can you tell us what you found when you arrived at the scene of the crime?
When I arrived at the scene of the crime, I was met by the reporter. She was crying and hysterical. She led me to where the body lay inside the dining room with several obvious bullet wounds in his body. There were several large splotches of blood in the living room on sofa number 2, and the blood trailed into the dining room where the deceased lay. I found a glass of wine that was half empty on the table to the right of sofa number 1, and a glass of scotch which was full in between the two tables, between the two couches.
Where did you find the defendant when you arrived?
I found the defendant, Mrs. Barbara Barrett, inside the downstairs bathroom, crying and screaming about how she did not mean to hurt John.
Do you think that means that she did hurt him then?
Yes.
In your expert opinion, in what order do you believe the shots were fired?
I believe that John was first shot in the upper left arm while lying on the sofa, sitting on the sofa, shot again when he turned around to run away from the defendant in the right leg. The third shot missed him and was recovered in the wall of the house. And then the defendant proceeded to fall and was shot twice more in the back and once in the head, which was the cause of death.
Your Honor, I would like to introduce Exhibit 8 into evidence, the confession.
Has defense been provided with a copy of exhibit number 8?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objections to exhibit number 8 being admitted?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit number 8 is admitted. Counsel, please proceed with questioning.
Were you the officer who interviewed Mrs. Barrett?
I was.
Do you make it a habit of reading your suspects their Miranda warnings?
Yes, I do read my suspects. I do make it a habit to read my suspects their Miranda warnings twice. Once before I interview them and once after they give this statement.
Can you tell us about your interview with Mrs. Barrett?
The defendant admitted that she had drunk a half glass of wine and that she remembered being very, very upset at the time.
Did she tell you if she had been threatened?
And when I asked if she was threatened, she said that she was not threatened at all by Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examination by the defense, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Is it true that you work 2 jobs, one for the police department and one as a security officer?
Yes.
Is it true that you work over a typical 40-hour week?
Yes.
Is it true that you were riding alone on the night of December 18th, 1988?
Yes, because my partner was ill that day.
Yes or no question, please. Is it true?
The court will direct the witness. If counsel has an objection, please state it for the record. Please proceed.
Is it true that you believe that Mrs. Barrett called a lawyer, but you were not sure about when?
I do not recall.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect on behalf of the people?
No, Your Honor.
Any objections to thanking and excusing this witness?
No, Your Honor.
Court thanks and excuses Officer Cheney. Hearing no objections. Who is the people's next witness, please? On behalf of the people, who is the next witness, please?
Your Honor, my co-counsel is having trouble unmuting herself.
What is your co-counsel's name, please, sir?
I cannot tell.
Okay, prosecution, I'm looking,
There we go.
okay. Are you unmuted? There we go, okay.
Yeah.
Counsel, if you could, please indicate the next witness for the record, please.
Can you restate your question? I couldn't hear you.
Could you please call your next witness, ma'am?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to call Miss Jo Armay to the stand, please.
I'm sorry, state that again?
I would like to call Miss Jo Armay to the stand.
Is Mr. May available? Okay, Mr. Joe May, please rise, raise your right hand, the bailiff will swear you in. Bailiff?
Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to the court and the jury of this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, you may be seated. The prosecution may proceed with direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, please state your name for the record.
Jo Armay.
Miss May, can you tell us your occupation and qualifications?
Yes, I am a medical examiner and a board certified MD and pathologist.
Your Honor, I would like to admit this witness as an expert witness in the field of board certified MD.
Ms. May, am I correct? I should be calling you Dr. May?
Yes.
My apologies for leaving off your title. On behalf of the defense, any objections to qualifying Dr. May as an expert witness in pathology?
Your Honor.
For hearing no objections, Dr. May is qualified as an expert witness. Please proceed.
I would also like to enter exhibit number 3, body diagram, as evidence.
Exhibit number 3, has defense counsel been provided with that exhibit? Defense counsel, have you been provided with number 3?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objections to its admission?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit number 3 will be admitted. Please proceed.
May, did you perform the autopsy on Mr. John Walker Barrett?
Yes.
Can you tell us what you found?
I found multiple gunshot wounds and a fractured cranium.
How many gunshot wounds did Mr. Barrett receive?
As you can see on Exhibit 3, there were 5 gunshot wounds, only one of which occurred when they were facing each other.
Could you please describe the bullet wounds?
Yes. There was one bullet wound to the upper portion of the left arm, front to back through and through, one to the upper right leg through and through, 2 to the back, slightly to the right of the midline where the deceased was on the floor, and the fatal shot to the back, to the posterior portion of the cranium.
In your autopsy, you stated that there was an absence of powder marks. Can you explain what that means?
Yes, it means that the muzzle of the firearm had to be more than 2 feet away. This is consistent with what I found in my research, in my autopsy.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Defense, cross-examination.
Is it possible to determine which order the shots were fired?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect on behalf of the people?
No, Your Honor.
Any objections to thanking and excusing this witness?
No, Your Honor.
witnesses?
The prosecution rests, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. Defense, you may call your first witness. Defense counsel, your first witness, please.
Your Honor, my name is
Yes.
Katrina.
Please proceed.
Okay, my name is Katrina Howe, and I would like to call Miss Barbara Barrett to the stand.
Ms. Barrett, would you please rise and raise your right hand? Bailiff, please swear the witness in.
Do you affirm that the evidence you give to the court and the jury of this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may be seated, Ms. Barrett. Counsel, please proceed with direct examination.
Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yes. My name is Barbara Allen Barrett, and I'm 47 years old.
Who were you first married to?
I was first married to a man named Michael John Reed.
And how did that relationship end?
Well, we married in 1970 and divorced 6 years later in 1976.
How long were you married to John Barrett?
John and I were married for 10 years.
Where did you first meet John?
I first met John at an alumni function for Vassar.
And how long were you and John dating?
Well, John and I dated for about 6 months.
Were there any red flags you could say before the marriage?
Yes. 2 weeks before the marriage, John arrived home at late time, and he arrived drunk and asked me to prepare him a drink. And so I prepared the drink, but I made it weak on purpose, hoping to tone down the scene a little bit. And when I served it to him, he was upset and knew that it was weak, and he threw it against the wall and glass went everywhere. And he slapped me across the face.
Did he only abuse you physically?
No.
What else did he?
He would call me incompetent and stupid.
What happened in your first year of marriage?
In our first year of marriage, only 8 months after we were married, it was quite late, about midnight, and I was wondering where John was. So I decided to go down to his office, and when I arrived, I saw him there with another woman sitting with him on his couch in his office, and I was very upset. So I later went home.
And what happened after that?
After I got home, a little while later, John arrived and accused me of spying on him and told me that if I was actually his true wife, that he wouldn't have to go and spend time with other women.
And did John leave it at that?
No, he didn't. I feared for my life, and I started to run for the door, and he caught me and was punching me, and then all I remember after that was being rushed to the hospital in an ambulance.
How many of these beatings would you endure every year?
The beatings would occur 3 to 4 times a year.
Did you ever seek help?
Yes, I did.
And who did you go to?
I first went to my minister, and he only told me to be submissive and just to forgive John and move on with my life. And then I saw a series of doctors that only prescribed me tranquilizers, and one even asked me what I did to provoke the beatings.
Who else knew about these beatings?
My parents, but I never wanted to make the facts public because I didn't want to create a scandal.
What happened after John arrived on the night December 18th, 1988?
When John arrived that night, we were arguing for a while, and then we were called into dinner by our housekeeper, Lee Porter, and we sat down for dinner.
And what happened after you sat down for dinner?
We sat down for dinner, and shortly after, John told me that he wanted a divorce, and I must have been crying a whole lot because he just told me to leave.
And where did you go after that?
After that, I stood up from the kitchen table and I went into the living room and I poured myself a glass of wine to help me think.
What did John do after you went into the living room?
After I poured myself a glass of wine, I remember John coming in with his belt in hand, and I thought he was going to choke and kill me.
And who else was at the house during that time?
Well, the only person at the house at the time was our housekeeper, Lee Porter.
Who exactly is Lee Porter?
Lee Porter is our housemaid who has been working for us for 6 months.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further.
Cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Hello, Ms. Barrett. Thank you for being here today. I would like to begin by confirming that you did sign your witness statement.
Yes.
Now, is it correct that in your witness statement, you described your husband, John, as a wonderful companion, perfect gentleman, considerate, sensitive, and kind?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would like to enter Exhibit 9 into testimony.
Is that been provided to the prosecution in this matter?
Yes.
Any objections by the prosecution?
No, Your Honor.
Number 9 will be admitted. Please proceed.
Also, Your Honor, I would like to enter Exhibit 8.
And I'm sorry, that is which document?
Number
Barbara's
8.
statement.
Okay. And what was the first?
First one was number 9. Any objections to number 8, counsel?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 8 will be admitted. You may proceed.
So in your witness statement, you stated that you were beat 3 to 4 times a year, and that no one had ever seen any signs of the physical abuse cycles. Is this correct?
Yes.
So if you were married for 9 years, that's approximately 30 times you would have been allegedly abused, correct?
Yes.
Miss Barrett, you want to convince the court that of those 30 times, no one had ever seen any physical abuse, including your housekeeper, who was at your house 40 hours a week?
Objection, Your Honor.
Not Trusley.
I'm sorry, 1 moment, there's an objection. And what is the nature of your objection, sir?
Lack of personal knowledge. The witness does not know what other people see.
Objection sustained. You'll need to rephrase the question, please.
Okay, so Miss Barrett, are you saying, Miss Barrett, so your housekeeper, he hasn't seen any signs, never mind, that's not correct. I'm just gonna move on.
Please do. Thank you.
So if no one saw any abuse, did you ever confide in any of your close friends or family about the alleged abuse?
I'm sorry, can you please restate your question?
Did you ever talk in secrecy with any of your friends or family about the abuse?
Yes, I told my minister and a few of the doctors in my.
Did they prescribe you with any medication?
Yes,
If so, can you tell us what prescription?
Tranquilizers,
Um,
but I never use them though.
Thank you. The one time you were sent to the hospital on account of one of John's alleged beatings, what did you tell the nurses when they asked you what had happened?
I told them that I fell down the stairs.
So you're saying that you lied, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
What's the basis of the objection?
Relevance. We are not trying to prove whether Mrs. Barrett lied. We are trying to prove whether she murdered her husband.
I'm going to allow it. It goes to refutation for truth and veracity. Please proceed.
According to your statement, several weeks prior to Miss Barrett's murder, he attacked you with a belt, and you knew he wanted to kill you. However, you didn't think that you were going to die, correct?
Yes.
Your statement claims also, on the night of the murder, Mr. Barrett took off his belt and had not approached you yet, and you thought you were going to die, correct?
Yes, I did.
On that night, from the time John walked into the living room where you were drinking your wine till when you were being taken to the police station, what exactly do you remember?
I'm sorry you broke up. Can you please restate your question?
Yes. On the night from the time John walked into the living room from where you were drinking your wine to when you were taken to the police station, what do you remember?
I do not remember anything after John came in with his belt. Until after I was.
Detail that you remember from that entire time span?
I'm sorry, can you please restate that question?
So you don't remember anything?
No, I do not.
Okay. Were you drinking on the night of the murder?
Yes, I poured myself a glass of wine to help me think.
Thank you. Was John sober the night of the murder?
Yes, he was.
Is it correct that on the night of the murder, John told you that he wanted a divorce?
Yes, he told me that at dinner, and I must have been crying a whole lot because he told me to leave.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Barrett, you may be seated. Defense's next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. My name is Allison Whitson, and I would like to call Dan McGuire to the stand.
Dan McGuire, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. McGuire, could you please rise and raise your right hand? Gonna need to unmute yourself, Mr. McGuire. There we go. We got you. Oh. Try it again. No, you're still muted. Go ahead and unmute yourself. There you go. Can you hear me now, Mr. McGuire?
Yes.
Thank you. Bailiff, please swear the witness in.
Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to the court and the jury of this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. You may be seated. Defense counsel, please start with your direct examination.
What is your area of expertise?
I am a psychologist and I work with battered women.
How old are you?
I am 42 years old.
How many women have you interviewed?
Well over 300.
How long have you been practicing psychology?
I've been practicing psychology for 17 years.
Where did you receive your education?
Can you please restate the question?
I couldn't hear you.
Yes. Where did you receive your education?
McGuire appears to be frozen, so let's give him just a moment. Here. Oh, there he is. Mr. McGuire, can you hear? Mr. McGuire, can you hear me? Mr. McGuire, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, my mom was helping. Yes, I can.
Okay, we're having a little trouble with your volume. Is there any way you can get closer to your microphone?
Sure, I can. Can you hear me now?
Oh, that's much better, Mr. McGuire. All right.
Thank you.
Counsel, please proceed with the questioning. Defense counsel, please proceed with questioning.
Where did you receive your education?
I received my BA from Campbell State University in Haddonfield, South Carolina, graduating with highest honors. I also received my master's degree in psychology.
What was your emphasis?
My emphasis was on sociological and psychological dysfunction within the family structure.
Have you ever appeared in court before as an expert witness?
Yes, in both civil and criminal trials.
Your Honor, I now ask that you treat Dan McGuire as an expert witness.
Any objections on behalf of prosecution?
No objection, Your Honor.
Before we agree to that, I guess we should find out what he's qualified as an expert in. Defense counsel, what expertise are you specifically requesting?
For battered women?
Expert in the field of battered women, is that correct?
Psychology?
I'm sorry, we weren't able to hear that. Can you please restate it?
Yes, in psychology and battered women.
Psychology and battered women. Okay. Now, for the stipulation, but on behalf of the prosecution, is that an acceptable expert qualification for you?
Yes, Your Honor.
Court will qualify, and I believe it should be Dr. McGuire. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Dr. McGuire will be qualified as an expert in psychology for battered women. Counsel, you may proceed with your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. What have you written professionally about the plight of a battered woman?
Dr. McGuire, are you there? Dr. McGuire, can you
Thank you.
hear me now?
It said
There
that
we go.
I
Try
couldn't.
again.
Yes, it said that I couldn't do it because the host muted me.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't
Can
know
you
why
hear me now?
that
All right. Can you please rephrase the question?
Yes. What have you written professionally about the plight of a battered woman?
I have written my thesis, which was passive behavior and learned helplessness in interfamilial relationships, and my book for late consumption, which was Living in Hell, the Life of a Battered Woman.
How do you define a battered woman?
I define a battered woman as one who is subject to any forceful, physical, or psychological behavior by a man against her will.
Why does a battered woman feel obligated to stay with her abusive husband?
First, because her psychological dependence on the man is very strong and nearly impossible to reject. And second, because she has no economic or legal choice.
Have you interviewed Barbara Barrett, the defendant, and what is your assessment of her condition?
I have interviewed her, and the things that Mr. Barrett did to her were very, very violent, and her case is the same as any other battered woman.
What was Barbara's psychological reaction to her husband telling her he was leaving?
She became unbelievably angry, and she could no more have controlled her actions than she could have controlled the sun rising in the morning.
Why do you compare a dog to a battered woman?
I merely state that the results of Dr. Samuel Michael's experiments with dogs and other types of animals with learned helplessness are nearly the exact same as that of a battered woman's.
Can you please tell me about the 3 battering phases?
Yes. The first battering phase is when tensions mount between the man and the woman, and there are minor battering instances, such as verbal abuse and minor physical violence. This phase may last for weeks or months. The second phase is called the acute battering phase. It is when the man releases an uncontrollable degree of tension, causing major physical and psychological destructiveness. This may last from weeks to a few hours to several days, and it is impossible for anyone, including the battered woman, to predict or to prevent this from happening. The third phase is one of loving and contrite behavior on the part of the man. His actions are usually an attempt to atone for his previously violent behavior. The battering woman sees him in this stage as a little boy who is desperately sorry for his actions and who equally desperately needs her forgiveness before he can continue living. The man underneath believes that he has secretly taught the woman a lesson and that surely he will have no further need to batter her. The whole cycle is basically repeated over and over again until the woman and the man inevitably kills each other or separates.
And who does the woman blame in this relationship?
She blames herself.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to introduce Exhibit 11, Dan McGuire's witness statement, into evidence.
And has defense counsel been provided with that exhibit?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objections to number 11?
No, Your Honor.
number 11 will be admitted. Please proceed.
The battered woman's anger increases with each cycle, correct?
Yes.
That would mean Barbara was an angry woman then?
Yes, she was forced into her anger.
In your statement, you refer to your theory of learned helplessness, correct?
Yes.
Were you the one who tested this theory?
No, it was another named Dr. Samuel Michaels.
Upon whom was your theory tested?
Can you restate the question, please?
Upon whom was your theory tested?
Dr. Samuel Michaels' theory was tested on dogs and other types of animals.
You say in your witness statement that Mrs. Barrett cannot have controlled her actions, implying that she's either mentally crazy or had a breakdown. But then you say that she finally saw her husband clearly. Isn't that a contradiction?
Yes.
So you're saying that in your statement you have a contradiction.
Objection, Your Honor.
And what's
Yeah.
the basis of that?
Relevance. We are not trying to prove discrediting Dan McGuire.
The court will overrule the objection based on relevance. I will indicate, though, it is asked and answered, and you'll need to move on, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. In your witness statement, you say that women who are abused will often attempt to deny reality. Can Mrs. Barrett's statement be trusted then?
Yes.
Why do you believe it can be trusted?
I believe it can be trusted because she denies reality in certain things involving her battering, and that is what she addresses in her witness statement.
One more question. In your statement that Mrs. Barrett had a floodgate of fury, how would that be different from malice?
Can you please restate the question?
In your statement that you say that Mrs. Barrett had a floodgate of fury, that would be malice, correct?
No.
Thank you, Your
It
Honor.
was from
No
the
further
husband.
questions.
Okay. Any redirect in this matter?
No, Your Honor.
Any additional witnesses? Sorry, any additional witnesses?
No, Your Honor.
Both sides have rested their case. The attorneys are now going to present their final arguments. At this time, defense counsel, are you prepared for your final argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court, Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is Katrina Howe, and I will be giving the closing remarks for the defense. Barbara is a loving, faithful, and loyal wife. Barbara has been loyal to her husband no matter what he has said or done. But in return, he has only abused her both physically and verbally. These actions have created a large toll on Barbara's mental health. Some may say that Barbara acted out of anger towards John. But if Barbara had been unhappy with her marriage with John, she would have divorced him. Barbara said that in her first marriage, she had a divorce. So she was not unfamiliar with how a divorce worked. Therefore, she must have wanted to stay with John. Many times over their 10 years of marriage, John worried Barbara because of his late nights. Once, Barbara went to John's office herself to see if her husband was well. And what did she find her husband doing? She had walked into a scene where her husband was comfy on a couch with a strange young woman beside him. Yet, even after she had seen with her own eyes what John had been doing, she still loved him with everything inside of her. And who would stay in that kind of a relationship if they did not truly love their spouse? Barbara was painfully abused. Barbara said that the beatings occurred every 3 to 4 months. These beatings would range from minor physical and verbal abuse, such as the time when John called Barbara incompetent and stupid and slapped her in the face, to major physical and verbal abuse, such as the time when John accused Barbara of spying and beat her to the point where she was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. Even though Barbara had been through all of these horrible beatings, she still believed that deep inside, John was still the loving man that she had. After a while, she believed that she could not live without John. Barbara could not have intentionally murdered her husband. In the South Carolina State Statute, number 16.3, murder is defined as the killing of another person with malice aforethought, either expressed or implied. How could Barbara be accused of murder? Barbara Barrett had spent 10 years loving her husband, John. She was there for him when he was at his best and worst. Barbara had endured so much horrible, devastating pain, but she did not believe that John could do her any real harm. Barbara had continuously told herself this over and over. She was living from one loving stage to the next. Barbara saw John as a young boy, one who lashes out in rage and anger from time to time, but ultimately just needs someone there to love him. By now, the love that Barbara had for John was beyond measure. But when John came home and said that he was going to leave Barbara that very night, it was as if a floodgate of emotion opened. All of the pain that she had endured, all of the blame that she had put on herself came rushing out. She could not have controlled herself as much as she could have stopped the sun from rising. So, with all of this evidence before you, how could you accuse this battered woman of premeditated murder on her very own dearly loved husband? Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Prosecution?
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as you know, my name is Cole Krieg, and I will be making the closing remarks in this case. I would like to thank the judge and jury for being so attentive during this case. Today, you have heard the tragic end to a human life. Every human life has value, and John Walker Barrett's life was no different. We have proven that Mr. Barrett was brutally murdered by Mrs. Barrett on the night of December 18th, 1988. Mr. Barrett arrived home late that night from his work. The Barrett's marriage was in trouble, and Mr. Barrett told Mrs. Barrett that night that he wanted a divorce. After their dinner, Mrs. Barrett threatened Mr. Barrett before they went into the living room, stating, "You'll be sorry." Mrs. Barrett then shot John while he was still reclining on the sofa and proceeded to shoot him a total of 5 times, even after Mr. Barrett attempted to escape. Our first witness, Lee Porter, showed that Mrs. Barrett not only patrolled her house with a gun, but also practiced that very day. She also witnessed the brutality of the murder when Mrs. Barrett mercilessly continued to chase John as he frantically tried to escape. Our second witness, Officer C.M. Cheney, was the brave officer who arrived at the scene of the crime. He detained Mrs. Barrett and interviewed her. He treated her with the utmost respect. He reported that Mrs. Barrett never said she had been threatened by John. Officer Cheney's diagram of the house also confirmed Lee Porter's report that John was chased and was first shot while sitting on the sofa. Our third witness, Dr. Joe Arme, examined Mr. Barrett's body and reported that he had been shot 5 times. This is too many times to be justified as self-defense. The defense also said that Mrs. Barrett had been frightened by Mr. Barrett, but this cannot be the case because Mrs. Barrett was the one who in fact threatened John before they went into the living room. In conclusion, we have shown Mrs. Barrett committed murder according to South Carolina Code 16-3-10. We have shown malice and forethought in the defendant's actions. If we do not convict Mrs. Barrett, what precedent will we be setting for future cases? As the judge instructed you, you must find the defendant guilty only if we, the prosecution, have proven Mrs. Barrett guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. We have met this standard. Mrs. Barrett must receive the consequences of her actions. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the prosecution, I ask that you return a guilty verdict.
Thank you. At this time, I am going to call a recess. Do we need to send the jurors into a breakout room again?
Let's do that, please, Your Honor. That way, if they have any final questions for their administrator, they'll have that assistance.
Okay, and I'm correct that after that 5 minutes, we'll come back and we'll do final questions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'll do a breakout room. I just want to be clear. I have 6 participants in the breakout room. I'm going to open that room now.
Yes. Thank you very much.